Welcome, dear listeners, to the Carolina Haints podcast, brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions in a Darker World. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. The Moravians came to America in 1735 from Germany. They established a large settlement in Pennsylvania, but quickly outgrew their property. They began looking for a second location. With its many streams, rivers, and rolling hills, the Piedmont area of North Carolina was reminiscent of their European homeland. They bought a piece of land they named the Wachovia Tract, and in 1753 sent a small group of men down to explore suitable locations to establish towns. This process took a few years, for, you see, the Wachovia Tract was rather large, covering close to half of Forsyth County. 165 square miles. This first group of explorers set up the settlement of Bethabara. It was intended to be a temporary location until their capital city of Bethania could be built. Bethania was spared from annexation in 1995 and remains the only continuously active Moravian town in the South. Other towns began to spring up in the Wachovia Tract: Salem, Friedberg, Friedland, and Hope. Salem, of course, is the best known of these, lending Winston-Salem half of its name. Today, Old Salem strives to maintain the traditional Moravian way of life. Officially, Old Salem is now called the Historic Town of Salem. But they can still be found at oldsalem.org, where they promise visitors, quote, an educational and memorable historical experience about those who lived in the early South, with special emphasis on the Moravians in North Carolina, end quote. They boast the oldest Protestant church in existence, built in 1457, in Moravia in the Czech Republic. But the Moravians hold slightly different beliefs than other Protestants. This, coupled with the misconception by some that all Moravians still like to live like reenactors at Old Salem, have led to the Moravians being confused with the Quakers, or the Amish, or even the Mormons. The truth is, other than sharing the basic tenets of Christianity, they have very little in common with either of these religions. For one thing, the Moravians make some really good cookies. But anyways, this isn't just a history podcast, it's a podcast for ghost stories. And that's where things take a turn for the ironic. The Moravians don't believe in ghosts. Okay, maybe that isn't that ironic, but try this. Even though the Moravians don't believe in ghosts, the best known resident of Old Salem is an apparition. 1786, Andreas Kresmer was a chimney sweep in Salem, North Carolina. He was a kind of playful man who would walk the streets with a red cap perched on his head and cheerfully nod to everyone he met. He especially loved the children and would make an extra effort to play with them and make them smile. However, the church and the community leaders, which were more or less the same people, criticized his chimney sweeping skills. Salem experienced an epidemic of measles, and the leaders claimed it was due to the frequency and quality of the town's chimney cleanliness. Kresmer was slight of stature and was just too small to climb some of the chimneys in town. The church thought a larger, more industrious man was needed for the job. Kresmer defended himself, saying, the town had too many chimneys for one man to keep clean up to the standards that the leaders demanded. He quit chimney sweeping and worked for a short time in the brothers' kitchen until finding his true calling as a cobbler. For the rest of his life, he could be found in the workroom in the brothers' house, wearing his favorite little red cap, tap, tap, tapping with his shoemaker's hammer. And what is the brothers' house, you ask? Moravian couples lived together in normal family homes. Everyone else, was divided up by their status into choirs: single men, single women, and widows, each to live in their own separate buildings. The brothers' house, built in 1769, was designed, quote, to withstand time and sorrow, end quote. And indeed, it still stands today, 250 years later. Its walls are extremely thick, and it has 4 stories, 3 floors and a basement. 2 upper levels were for eating, sleeping, and working. The first floor, called the first basement, contained the kitchen and additional workspace. The rear of the first story is only about 4 feet high to accommodate the slope of land. Below ground is the sub-basement, referred to as the deep cellar. It has a high vaulting ceiling, but it's a gloomy, dark place with no windows, and in the 1700s, the only illumination came from candles and lanterns. In 1786, the brothers built an addition onto the house. As was their custom, the men performed their regular duties during the day. Then, after evening worship, they would work on the addition. They often worked well past midnight. On the night of March 25th, 1786, Kresmer and several other men decided to work in the deep cellar. It was common practice at the time to dig an undercut at the base of the wall. Then the soil above could be brought down quickly and cleanly. Around 11:30 that night, another brother came into the basement and commented that the overhanging soil looked loose and unstable. The men digging the undercut didn't think there was much danger and continued working. Around midnight, the overhang began to collapse. Everyone scrambled to safety, except for Andreas Kresmer. The wall came down, burying him under a ton of sand, soil, and rock. Only his red cap was visible. The other men worked quickly to free him, and alarmed by the commotion, other brothers came from upstairs to also help. Kresmer was freed as quickly as possible. His leg was clearly broken, but he was conscious and alert, complaining of extreme pain. The doctors did everything they could, but it was soon apparent that Andreas did not have much time left. He passed away a couple of hours later. Kresmer was remembered in the many tears that fell that night. But Kresmer's story doesn't end there. Soon after the fatal accident, the other brothers began to hear unusual creaking and knocking noises at night. The church frowned upon this kind of talk and severely admonished the men. The large building was over 20 years old. It was bound to creak at night due to settling and weather. Besides, the Moravians don't even believe in ghosts. But that doesn't mean the ghosts didn't believe in them. Before long, it became obvious that these were not ordinary creaks and knocks. At times, the unmistakable tap-tap-tapping of the shoemaker's hammer could be heard, and, on occasion, light footsteps could be heard walking through the halls where no one was there. The frightened men would look at each other and whisper, "That's Kresmer." But they were torn. Who, or what, did they fear more? A ghost? Or the church that forbid them from acknowledging it? As time passed, there was no denying that something unusual was going on in the brother's house. From time to time, one of the brothers may catch a quick glimpse out of the corner of his eye, seeing a flash of red as a figure slips past the doorway. Of course, when they investigated, no one was there, and eventually, even members of the church's leadership began to concede that they may, indeed, have a specter among their congregation. Years pass, and the brothers find themselves no longer in need of such a large building. They moved out, and the building became the widow's house. Occasional sightings of Kresmer continued to be reported from time to time. The widows enjoyed a good tale, and stories of Kresmer and his ghost were talked about often. When Betsy was just a baby, she became very sick. She recovered from her illness, but the ordeal left her deaf. When she was a bit older, she was at the widow's house spending some time with her grandmother. Being deaf for most of her life, she had never heard of Andreas Kresmer. So as you can imagine, everyone was stunned when she came running into the room with her grandmother, saying that she saw a little man in the hallway and he motioned for her to come to him. There is a more recent story, or at least recent enough for electric lights to have been installed in the deep cellar. 2 men were down there. One was rather skeptically listening to the other man who told the story of the little red man. And suddenly the apparition appeared before them, seemingly as solid as you or I. Thinking that someone was playing a hoax on them, the first man motioned to the second, and they attempted to grab the figure. They closed in on him and pounced, only to wrap their hands around thin air. A tap-tap-tapping noise made them look behind, where they saw the little red man taunting them from across the room, before vanishing completely. The story finally came to an end when a visiting minister heard the tale and decided to put a stop to Old Salem's ghost once and for all. He strode through the widow's house, praying and invoking the Holy Trinity, and commanding the spirit of Kresmer to rest at peace. Apparently it worked. There have been no more reported sightings ever since. You know, the great thing about Old Salem is that you can go and visit the widow's house for yourself. You can see this building firsthand and walk around in it. You can look down the dark hallways and take a second look at all the shadows that pass by. And you can listen out for yourself for that faint tapping of the shoemaker's hammer. I've been there quite a few times myself, and I can highly recommend Old Salem is worth a visit. To learn more about the Little Red Man, check out Tar Heel Ghosts by John Harden. There's also Spooky North Carolina, Tales of Haunting, Strange Happenings, and Other Local Lore by S.E. Schlosser. You can also check out more about the Wachovia Tract in Old Salem at oldsalem.org. And there's also northcarolinaghost.com/Piedmont/Little Red Man. This episode was researched and written by Jeffrey Cochran, who also wanted me to remind you that we will gladly accept some Moravian cookies. You can learn more about all the things that Jeff's up to at his company at adarkerworld.com. You can check out everything that we're up to at our company, Wreak Havoc Productions, at wreakhavocproductions.com. Check out our sister podcast, the Wreak Havoc Film Buffs Podcast, and if you're like me and a big fan of horror, check out the 5th annual Wreak Havoc Horror Film Festival coming later this year. If you're a listener who enjoys this show and gets a lot out of it, well, by God, take a second, consider helping us out. Just visit patreon.com/wreakhavoc, and for the special contribution of $10 a month, you'll get a whole slew of perks, including a special bonus episode of the Carolina Haints podcast. You can email me your thoughts, questions, and concerns at wreakhavocproductions@gmail.com. I enjoy hearing from fans of the show and would love to hear your thoughts and comments. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode. Tune in then to hear more about the things that go bump in the night.